morning. What's up? Chris, VA Travels. And yeah, I got up early. I came down here to Slaughter Pen Farm. It's the southern end of the Battle of Fredericksburg. And as soon as the sun comes up, I'm going to do a walk around. And I've been wanting to come out to these battlefields for a while. Been reluctant just because they're usually just wide open fields, not much to see. But I guess I'm going to throw up a lot of drone footage, put up a lot of pictures to kind of keep things moving. And actually just I finished this book, Fredericksburg. And yeah, it was a chore getting through this thing. But it's not as bad as it seems. The last third is kind of just bibliography, just kind of footnotes in the back. But yeah, I wanted to knock it out while everything's fresh in my head. And I think over the next couple months, I'm going to also visit Prospect Hill. It's the Confederate side of the southern end down here of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Visit Marie's Heights up there and that big national cemetery. And then probably go over to the Stafford Civil War Park. I guess it was the winter encampment for the Union soldiers. So yeah, it should keep me busy for the next couple months. And anyway, gonna finish up my coffee and wait for the sun to come up. Okay, here we go. And yeah, today's actually December 11th. So this would be the 159th anniversary of the battle. The actual action really took place December 13th, but I have to work that day. So, all right, before I get started, I just wanted to let you know that this land was actually the site of the first English settlement in the Fredericksburg area. 1671, King Charles II granted land to a guy named Lawrence Smith. And about 5 years later, he set up a fort. They call it Colonial Fort. And you're not going to be able to see it from here, but there's a placard on the side of the road up there that talks about it. And so Lawrence Smith opened the fort with a guy named Robert Taliaferro, pronounced Tolliver. And it's Robert the Immigrant for any kind of Virginia history nerds. And I say that because the Tollivers were one of Virginia's big first families. And yeah, so they set up, they came in. If you want to know where it's at, the Fredericksburg Country Club is on the other side of those trees, kind of right in front of my finger. And the site of the actual fort was on the 10th hole, which is right behind the clubhouse. And yeah, they named it Smithfield Plantation after Lawrence Smith, who settled the land. So, and I went back there a couple of weeks ago, tried to film a video, but I got kicked off because it's a private club. Anyway, so all right, so I'm just going to do a walk around here, and I'm just going to kind of just give you an overview of what happened in the battle. And let me throw out there, I'm not a Civil War expert. Like I say, I read that book and lived in the Fredericksburg area about half my life, and I just kind of know from just knowing. But first, let me tell you that this house has no historical significance. And this the fields out here, this field was littered with barns at one time. They were taken down. And I don't know why they didn't take this house down. Maybe it was just too much work, but you see it's in pretty rough shape. Big branch on the porch there. Branches overhanging the house. And yeah, but this house was owned by a guy named John Pearson. He died 2005. And his family put the property up for sale. And it was originally zoned for industrial use. But luckily, the Civil War Preservation Trust stepped in and they purchased these 206 acres for $12 million. So it's a good thing they did that. And yeah, that map's a mess. And yeah, it's a good thing they did that because subdivisions are developing all around. So yeah. Anyway, so to give you some background on the battle, things I guess you could say first began. The Battle of Antietam was September 1862. The battle was a stalemate. Some people consider it a Union victory just because it stopped the Confederates from advancing into Maryland, up north. Yeah, so the Confederates had to turn around, come back over across the Potomac, and Abraham Lincoln wanted Union General McClellan to chase the Confederate army down and kind of just finish the job. And McClellan was kind of like, hey, we just fought the bloodiest battle in American history. You know, let's slow it down. I just had, I don't know, 2,000 men, whatever, die. And Abraham Lincoln was pushing for a decisive victory because political reasons. There were midterms on the horizon. He just announced the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. He was getting ready to go public with it. So anyway, he ended up ousting McClellan, and he put in General Burnside. And Burnside knew that he was hired to be more aggressive, and I mention all this because it kind of explains some of his actions here in the Battle of Fredericksburg. So Burnside marched his army down from Western Maryland, and it swelled to 130,000 soldiers down here to the northern side of the Rappahannock. They arrived towards the end of November, and they couldn't cross because the pontoon bridges hadn't arrived. There was some sort of miscommunication with the engineers, and they were about 10 days late. And this is pretty much what decided the war before it even started, because that gave Robert E. Lee time to figure out what was going on. He was more in central Virginia, and he wasn't sure if the Union Army was going to march toward Richmond via Fredericksburg or come down a little further west and come down to James. So it gave Lee and Longstreet, who was out in Culpeper, time to come down, set up at Marie's Heights, and more importantly, it gave, oh boy, there might be a lot of people coming. It gave Stonewall Jackson, who was out in the Savannah area, time to come down and set up down here, Prospect Hill. As a matter of fact, a couple of his divisions didn't even arrive until the night before the battle. So take a look at this. And yeah, so here we are, and a little walking trail right here. It says it takes about 90 minutes to complete. It's about 1.75 miles, and these little placards, these markers right here. Stop and read. So yeah, so Burnside wasn't able to cross the Rappahannock until started crossing on the 11th, but really the 12th was the big day of crossing. And the southern portion, oh, there's a whole bunch of people. It must be a Civil War kind of a tour going on. I'll try to kind of walk fast. Yeah, so Franklin, who was in charge of the Grand Division that was covering the southern portion of the battlefield here, he brought his 1,000 men down across, and they crossed on 3 pontoon bridges which were about 1 mile up the Rappahannock. There's a bend in the Rappahannock there's an industrial park up there. If anybody's familiar with, there's a Bowman's Distillery up there. It's kind of just south of where Deep Run Creek spills into the Rappahannock. They crossed and they marched down this old stage. This Route 2 right here was the old stage road. Some people had referred to it as the Richmond Stage Road or the Bowling Green Stage Road, and it was the main artery going to Richmond. It goes way on down past the Hanover Tavern, all that. I did a video on the Hanover Tavern, check it out, quick plug. So yeah, he marched his army down. Also, to let you know that Stage Road, obviously it was a dirt road. It was a little bit elevated. There was a ditch on each side at the time, and there were hedges on each side. So I just note that just because it took the Union a hot minute to cross. So yeah, they came down on the 12th, camped out on the other side of the road. There was also artillery set up on the Stafford Heights on the other side of the Rappahannock. And to tell you where we're at, I don't want to say the main, but the portion of the Battle of Fredericksburg everybody's familiar with, Marie's Heights, the Irish Brigade. Like I say, all that's about 4 miles north. And this was actually the Union's main focus during the attack, because the night of the 12th, Franklin was up in Fredericksburg had a meeting with Burnside and all the head generals, and they had determined this was the weakest end of the Confederate line. And General Franklin understood that there was going to be a full-on pre-dawn assault straight ahead toward Prospect Hill. So, and that morning he was going to receive the official orders. Let me stop right here. All right, right here, this little plaque here goes over General Pelham, John Pelham's assault. I'll get to that. He was about 1 mile down that way. But this little ditch fence at the time, 1862, it was a lot wider, a lot deeper. And yeah, it's really slowed the Union Army as they advanced. They kind of got a little disorganized. And these ditch fences were popular, I guess, before there was barbed wire. It just kind of divided, kept the cattle from crossing, used for irrigation and so forth. Yeah, a big tour group. I actually wish probably been good to take that before I came, but yeah, so the morning of the 13th, Franklin got up early, but no courier had arrived. And it was really cold, frosty morning. So the courier was slow, didn't arrive until about 7:30. And by this time, the sun had started coming up. And there was a miscommunication with the letter that was written from Burnside, and Franklin understood it to read that Franklin was just supposed to send one division forward, and he couldn't understand this. And he thought, well, maybe there was a change of plans after I left, and we're supposed to be some sort of maybe diversion for the northern end of the battlefield. So he got his men ready. It was too late in the morning to send anybody back for confirmation. He knew he had to get going. So also, all right, so before I get going with the attack, let me just kind of explain the layout. And I'll explain the breakdown of the Union Army, just for any non-military people like me. And I used to always get confused by this when people would talk about brigades, regiments, divisions. And the Union Army, like I say, 130,000 strong, was so bloated that Burnside had to add another layer of command. So you had the Major General Burnside, the bigwig. Under him, you had the army was divided into 3 grand divisions. And like I said, Franklin, his grand division was down here. Then your center grand division was Joseph Hooker, and he was kind of in reserve. He was kind of back a little ways. And then the Fredericksburg end of the battlefield was General Sumner. So you had 3 grand divisions. Under the grand divisions, you had corps. And there were 2 corps under General Franklin, and General Reynolds was the one who was handling this assault. And then, so under the corps, you had divisions. And so Reynolds had 3 divisions. All right, to the left, he had Gibbon's division. Meade's division, you could almost picture them in front of the, or on the Fredericksburg golf course, the country club. And then he had Abner Doubleday, who, if you're not familiar with the area, there's a shopping center just past the country club. There's a Wise grocery store and all that. You could picture Abner Doubleday there. And he had selected Meade's division to advance, and he would end up advancing. You'll see these warehouses up there, kind of a little industrial park type thing. That was the site of his advancement. And he had selected Meade. He was the most seasoned general. Take a look at this plaque. And yeah, so like I say, here's Meade's, like I say, Gibbon's over here. Abner Doubleday would be over here. Yeah. So Franklin and Reynolds got everybody prepared. And so it was about 10 o'clock that Meade's division began crossing. And it took them a hot minute, like I say, to cross that old stage road. And as soon as they had crossed, an important moment in the battle that John Pelham, who had mentioned, the Confederate artillerymen, got Jeb Stuart's permission to move forward with a lone cannon to assault the Union lines. And this is important, and because it held them stationary for about an hour, from 10 to about 11 o'clock. So Meade's division had crossed the old stage road. They had hit the deck. They were on the ground. They suffered heavy casualties. Abner Doubleday's divisions suffered heavy casualties, and they were pretty much taken out of the battle. But Doubleday mainly, I think they called it his Iron Brigade, ended up stopping Pelham eventually. And oh yeah, you can hear, I don't know, there's a lot of wind, but here a train whistle, like I say, the train tracks were right here before these trees. And also, I'll throw out there real quick, the train tracks were out of commission. The Confederates had blown up the bridge crossing the Rappahannock. And so the tracks were out of commission until Hamilton's Crossing, which is about a mile down that way. So the Confederate supply trains were coming out of Richmond, and they would have to stop at Hamilton's Crossing. And yeah, that sounds like maybe a CSX train. A lot of Amtrak trains shooting down here. And there's also a commuter rail going up to DC. All right, so yeah. Pelham had held Meade back for about an hour. So once his bombardment stopped, and it was also important too because it was really foggy morning, so it gave about another hour for the fog to lift and for Jackson's line to see what was going on. And so about 11 o'clock, Meade's army started to advance. And then the Union Army started shelling the Confederate line. And they actually didn't do much damage. They were aiming high, so a lot of the shells went over top of the Confederate line. So Meade's army began to advance. Like I said, it was about 11 o'clock. They ended up crossing that ditch fence. They became a little bit disorganized. And then they got up here into what they call the killing range, because the Union Army was bombarding the Confederates, but the Confederates weren't firing back. They just didn't have as much ammunition as the Union Army. They were holding back until the Union line got to this killing zone. It was about 800 yards. You see the train coming now. It's about 800 yards from the Confederate line. No, it's Amtrak. Yeah, and the Confederates had this line marked off. There was an old tree. There was actually the caretaker's cottage from the Mansfield plantation, which was the biggest plantation in Fredericksburg at the time. There's an elk lodge. I don't know if you can see a little red kind of sign in front of my finger, but a quarter mile, half a mile behind that, if you go behind the actual elk lodge, there's a soccer field, and the Mansfield plantation was on that soccer field. And a guy named Arthur Bernard was running the plantation at the time, and all this was Mansfield plantation. And real quick, I'll just throw in another plug. Mansfield plantation, built by Man Page III, out from Rosewell plantation out in Gloucester. I did a video on that, go check it out. And yeah, it burned down about a month after the battle. It burned down in January of '63, and it was actually accidentally burned down by Confederate soldiers. They tried to start a fire on the wooden floor. So anyway, that's gone. And oh yeah, so the reason I mention all this, because the caretaker's cottage for that Arthur plantation, the Mansfield plantation, was right up here where this sign is, and the Confederates prior had burned it down just so the Unions couldn't occupy, but they had left the chimney, so they knew that chimney and that tree were markers for this killing zone. So about 11:30, the Union Army had hit this killing zone, and that's when the Confederates opened up. And then again, Meade's army hit the deck. And in the meantime, Gibbons was beginning to advance as kind of a backup. So yeah, this was a pretty intense moment. Meade's army had hit the deck. There were shells flying from the Stafford Heights overhead to the Confederate line. Confederates were bombing, and then Jeb Stuart's artillery, horse artillery, began firing from the south or the east, that way about a mile. Yeah, so pretty intense moment. And then during this bombardment, at some point, Union shells had hit a couple Confederate magazines, causing really large explosions. One of the magazines was over on the other side of the woods in front of my finger at Bernard's cabins, and it was a little slave community. I think there were about 30 slaves lived there. There were 3 cabins. Blew all that to smithereens. And so Meade heard this, and he knew that it was his time to advance. All right, let me pause right here to tell you about the Confederate line. Like I say, this is all Stonewall Jackson's line. Over here was A.P. Hill's division, and he had 2 brigades. He had Lane's brigade over here, and then he had Archer's brigade. Well, maybe more over here, and then Archer kind of way down there behind those warehouses. And the Confederates had left about a 600-yard gap in a really wooded, swampy area they thought was impenetrable. So when Meade heard these explosions, he sent his men forward, and yeah, they penetrated that gap, and they had made it across. They were going up Prospect Hill to eventually reserves came forward. They were eventually pushed back, and something else I'll throw out there. When this was happening, Meade had sent a courier back to the line to a guy named Birney. Birney had a division under a different corps. It was actually a corps under Joseph Hooker. He had sent a courier back saying, hey, we busted through, we need reinforcements. And Birney just kind of rejected the advancement. He said, you're breaking ranks. I'm in a division under a different corps, you're not supposed to be telling me what to do. So he sent 2 couriers back to no avail. So eventually Meade rode back himself, laid into him, was like, hey, we busted through. But by this time it was too late. So yeah, so Meade was eventually pushed back. And so about 30 minutes after Meade made his big charge, Gibbons began to advance over here. And he did make it past the railroad tracks. And yeah, this is the little plaque, and this is that chimney I was telling you about that was left from the caretaker's cottage. And this talks about the Mansfield plantation. And this shows Meade's advance right here. He was eventually pushed back. That Maxie Gregg, I told you who died, was back here. And yeah, see, here we are, Gibbons. And this is that guy, Birney, who didn't help out. laid back here. So here we are. Gibbons made his advancement. First he sent his brigade, Taylor's brigade. They were quickly repelled. Then he sent Lyle forward. He fared a little bit better, but they ran low on ammunition. And also, like I say, this was Lane's brigade, the North Carolina brigade, on the other side of the woods. They were running low on ammunition as well. So then eventually Gibbons sent Root's brigade forward. They're the ones who crossed the railroad tracks, and this got really intense. There was a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, but eventually reinforcements came in, and yeah, those are those Bernard cabins I was talking about, the slave cabins that were blown up with the Confederate artillery right there. So eventually they were pushed back. And something I should note is that Gibbons was actually raised in North Carolina, but he went to West Point. So when the war broke out, he decided to side with the Union Army. But something I'll point out is that 3 of his brothers, like I say, from North Carolina, were in that Lane's division, the Confederate division. So he was firing on his brothers, basically. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. While I'm mentioning that, I'll also mention that Meade's cousin was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. And yeah, so that kind of wraps up the Battle of Fredericksburg. I'm going to take a walk down here, but these plaques just kind of just go over Gibbons' advancement up here, and it runs along kind of the railroad tracks down there. So to wrap it up, it was about 2:30 p.m. pretty much over. The Confederates made a kind of a small charge forward, but they were repelled. And then eventually the Union Army, they set up camp for the winter over in Stafford. Yeah, that wraps it up. My next video will probably be over at Prospect Hill, like I say, the Confederate side of the southern portion down here. And yeah, so as always, if you like these kinds of videos, you can subscribe. If you want to support the channel, hit the like button, and see ya.